The dust kicked up in golden clouds as Deanna Lawson pressed her forehead against the rough wooden fence, watching the other ranch hands drive cattle across the open range while she scrubbed another pot in the cookhouse. She was 22 years old and had spent her entire life working for other people on other people's land, sleeping in borrowed beds, wearing hand-me-down dresses that never quite fit right, and the weight of it all pressed down on her shoulders like the merciless California sun that blazed overhead this summer of 1884. Porterville sprawled across the San Joaquin Valley floor, a dusty collection of buildings and dreams where the Sierra Nevada mountains rose like giants in the eastern distance. The town had grown up around cattle ranching and the railroad, bringing with it all manner of people seeking their fortunes or running from their pasts. Deanna belonged to neither category. She had been born here to parents who worked themselves to death on someone else's property, leaving her at 15 to fend for herself. She had moved from ranch to ranch, trading her labor for food and a place to sleep, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home because she knew better than to grow attached to things that were not hers. The Double K Ranch where she currently worked sprawled across thousands of acres, owned by Kendrick brothers who treated their workers fairly enough, but made it clear that everyone had their place. Deanna's place was in the cookhouse, preparing meals for 30 ranch hands 3 times a day, washing dishes until her hands cracked and bled, and occasionally helping with laundry when the regular woman took ill. It was honest work, but it left her feeling hollowed out, like she was watching life happen to everyone else while she stood on the sidelines. "Deanna, we need more coffee out here," bellowed Chuck, the foreman, from the bunkhouse porch. She wiped her wet hands on her apron and hurried to brew another pot, her mind already cataloging the 100 other tasks waiting for her attention. The life she led moved in endless circles, each day bleeding into the next with nothing to distinguish Tuesday from Thursday, except perhaps the particular stains on the shirts she scrubbed. It was early evening when she finally finished her duties and stepped outside to breathe air not thick with steam and grease. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. She walked toward the small creek that ran along the eastern boundary of the property, seeking a few moments of peace before exhaustion pulled her toward sleep. That was when she first saw him. Quincy Jarrett sat on a painted stallion at the creek's edge, letting his horse drink while he surveyed the land with eyes the color of weathered denim. He was tall and lean, built like someone who had spent his life in the saddle, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that might have been carved from the same stone as the distant mountains. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, nothing fancy, but everything about him spoke of quiet competence. Deanna stopped in her tracks, suddenly aware that she was staring. He turned his head and met her gaze, and something passed between them in that moment, some recognition that neither could name. "Evening, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. His voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "Evening," she managed, feeling her cheeks flush. "You are new here, just hired on today," he confirmed, swinging down from his saddle with easy grace. "Quincy Jarrett, I will be working with the horse herd. Deanna Lawson, I work in the cookhouse." He walked closer, leading his horse, and she noticed the way he moved with unhurried confidence, like a man comfortable in his own skin. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Lawson. That was a fine supper you prepared. Best biscuits I have had in months." She was not accustomed to compliments about her cooking. The ranch hands shoveled down whatever she prepared with barely a word, treating her more like furniture than a person. "Thank you. That is kind of you to say." "Just honest," he replied, and his smile reached his eyes in a way that made her pulse quicken. They stood there by the creek as the light faded, talking about small things, inconsequential things, but Deanna felt something shifting inside her chest. Quincy told her he had come up from Texas after working several ranches there, looking for new opportunities in California. He spoke about horses the way some men spoke about religion, with reverence and passion, describing the way a good horse could read your intentions before you even knew them yourself. "I have always wanted to learn to ride properly," Deanna admitted, surprising herself with the confession. "But I have never had the chance, never had a horse of my own or anything really." Something flickered across Quincy's face, an emotion she could not quite read in the gathering darkness. "Never had anything of your own." She shrugged, trying to make light of it even as the admission carved out a hollow space in her chest. "I've been working other people's ranches since I was 15. Everything I use belongs to someone else. The bed I sleep in, the dresses I wear, even the pots I cook with. Nothing is mine." "That does not seem right," Quincy said quietly. "Everyone ought to have something that belongs to them alone." "Well, that is just how things are," Deanna replied, wrapping her arms around herself as the evening air grew cooler. "I do not mind it most days, but she did mind it. She minded it terribly, though she had learned to bury that longing so deep that she could almost pretend it did not exist." Quincy looked at her with such understanding in his eyes that she wondered if he could see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed often. Quincy would appear at the cookhouse door early in the morning to collect coffee for the men working the horse herd, and he would linger for a few extra minutes, talking with Deanna while she kneaded bread dough or stirred pots of stew. He told her stories about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 19, about the years of drifting from place to place trying to figure out where he belonged. "I suppose we have that in common," Deanna said one morning while she packed biscuits into a basket for him to take. "The not belonging anywhere part." "Maybe," Quincy agreed, his fingers brushing hers as he took the basket. "Or maybe we just have not found our place yet." She wanted to believe that, wanted to imagine that somewhere in this vast country there was a place she could call home, but hope felt dangerous. Every time she had allowed herself to hope for something better, life had reminded her of her station. Quincy began showing up at the creek in the evenings when Deanna took her brief respite from work. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past while the sky performed its nightly spectacle of colors. She learned that he could play harmonica and that he had a surprisingly good singing voice. He learned that she loved to read but rarely had access to books, and the next day he appeared with a worn copy of poetry that he had traded for in town. "I thought you might like this," he said, handing it to her with a slightly awkward gesture that she found endearing. Deanna took the book with trembling hands, running her fingers over the cracked leather cover. "I cannot accept this. It is too much." "It is a gift," Quincy said firmly. "And before you say you cannot take gifts, let me tell you that refusing would be an insult to my generosity, and I am a very proud man." His eyes twinkled with humor, and she found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Well, I would not want to insult you." "Exactly," he said with satisfaction. "So you will keep it, and maybe you will read me some of those poems sometime." She did read to him, sitting by the creek as twilight deepened, her voice halting at first and then growing stronger as she lost herself in the rhythm of the verses. Quincy listened with complete attention, his eyes never leaving her face, and Deanna felt seen in a way she never had before. But she was also afraid. Afraid of caring too much, afraid of the way her heart lifted whenever she saw him, afraid that this was just another thing that would be taken from her because nothing good ever stayed in her life for long. The Kendrick brothers noticed Quincy's skill with horses and put him in charge of breaking the wild Mustangs they had captured from the foothills. It was dangerous work that required patience, strength, and an almost supernatural ability to read an animal's behavior. Deanna watched from a distance when her duties allowed, her breath catching every time Quincy climbed into the corral with a half-wild horse that could easily kill him. "He is something special with those horses," remarked Sarah, one of the other women who helped with laundry. She was older than Deanna, with kind eyes and a knowing smile. "And he looks at you like you are something special too." "He is just being friendly," Deanna protested, though her cheeks burned. "Girl, I have been around long enough to know the difference between friendly and smitten. That man is head over heels." Deanna wanted to believe it, but she had learned to guard her heart. Men said pretty things all the time, but when it came down to it, they wanted women with dowries, with property, with something to offer. What could she possibly give someone like Quincy except her work-worn hands and a heart that had learned to expect disappointment? One Saturday afternoon in late August, Quincy asked if she would take a walk with him into town. Porterville was only a mile from the ranch, an easy stroll in the relative cool of evening. Deanna hesitated, knowing that being seen together would spark talk among the other workers, but the hopeful expression on Quincy's face dissolved her resistance. "I would like that," she said softly. They walked side by side down the dusty road, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Quincy pointed out landmarks, telling her stories about the area that he had picked up from other ranch hands. He made her laugh with his descriptions of the various characters who populated the local saloon, and he listened with genuine interest when she talked about the books she had read, the dreams she used to have before she learned to stop dreaming. In town, he bought her a lemon candy from the general store, insisting despite her protests. They sat on a bench outside and watched people pass by, and Deanna tried to memorize every detail of the moment because she knew that even if everything else faded, she wanted to remember this feeling of simple happiness. "Deanna," Quincy said, his voice suddenly serious. "I need to tell you something." Her stomach clenched with anxiety. Here it came, the moment when he would explain that he was moving on, or that he had a girl back in Texas, or any of the 100 ways this could end badly. "I have been saving my wages," he continued, staring at his hands. "Ever since I was 19 and on my own, I have been putting aside every penny I could spare. I have a dream of having my own place someday, maybe a small ranch where I can breed horses. Nothing fancy, just something that belongs to me." Deanna waited, unsure where this was leading. "The thing is," Quincy said, finally meeting her eyes, "I have been thinking lately that a place does not mean much if you do not have someone to share it with, and I find myself wanting to share things with you." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Quincy, I do not understand what you are saying." "I am saying that I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know I do not have much to offer yet, but I would like the chance to try, to court you properly if you would be willing." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Deanna searched his face for any sign of deception or mockery but found only honest emotion. "Why me?" she whispered. "I have nothing. I am nobody." Quincy reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "You are not nobody. You are the woman who works harder than anyone I have ever met, who reads poetry by Creekside, who has every reason to be bitter but still finds ways to be kind. You are everything, Deanna. Can you not see that?" Tears pricked her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I am afraid to believe this is real. I am afraid too, Quincy confessed. But maybe being afraid together is better than being safe and alone. She thought about all the years of loneliness, all the nights she had cried into borrowed pillows, all the times she had convinced herself that wanting more was foolish. And then she thought about the way Quincy made her feel seen, valued, like she mattered for who she was rather than what she could do. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "I would like you to court me." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant and full of promise. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and Deanna felt like she was floating several inches above the dusty road. True to his word, Quincy courted her with old-fashioned intentionality. He carved her a small wooden bird that she kept in her apron pocket, a reminder that she had something of her own. He brought her wildflowers picked from the hills, their colors bright against the drab cookhouse walls. He taught her to play simple tunes on his harmonica, laughing when she produced more squeaks than music. The other ranch hands teased Quincy mercilessly about being love-struck, but he took it with good humor, never denying or hiding his feelings for Deanna. She marveled at his openness, the way he was unashamed to show the world that he cared for a cookhouse worker with no family and no prospects. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the hills. The Kendrick brothers had acquired a new herd of wild Mustangs, including one particularly magnificent stallion that had so far resisted all attempts at breaking. The horse was the color of smoke, with intelligent dark eyes and a spirit that refused to be crushed. "I am going to gentle that one," Quincy told Deanna one evening by the creek. "Not break him, but gentle him. There is a difference." "How so?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder in a way that had become natural over the past weeks. "Breaking a horse means crushing their spirit until they submit out of fear," Quincy explained, absently playing with her fingers. "Gentling means building trust until they choose to work with you. It takes longer, requires more patience, but you end up with a partner instead of a slave." Deanna thought about her own life, about all the ways people had tried to break her spirit, to make her accept that she deserved nothing better than endless servitude. "I think you are gentling me too," she said quietly. Quincy pulled back to look at her face. "What do you mean?" "You are teaching me that I do not have to be afraid of wanting things, of believing I deserve more than scraps," she explained. "You are patient with me when I pull away or doubt, and you never try to force me into anything. You are helping me choose to trust." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Deanna felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower opening to sunlight. They had kissed before, but this felt different, deeper, like a promise neither had put into words yet. Over the following weeks, Deanna watched Quincy work with the gray Mustang. He spent hours in the corral, not riding but simply being present, letting the horse grow accustomed to his scent and voice. He spoke to the animal in low, soothing tones, offering treats and gradually increasing physical contact until the horse stopped shying away from his touch. "You have got to be the most patient man alive," observed Tom, another ranch hand, as they watched Quincy make painstakingly slow progress. "Some things are worth taking time with," Quincy replied, and his eyes found Deanna where she stood by the cookhouse door. The Kendrick brothers were impressed enough with Quincy's skills that they offered him a permanent position with increased wages, along with a small cabin on the property instead of a bunk in the shared quarters. It was a significant promotion, recognition of his value to the ranch. That evening, Quincy found Deanna and practically lifted her off her feet in his excitement. "Did you hear? They are giving me the old line cabin up by the north pasture. It is not much, but it is private, and there is enough land around it that I could build a small corral, start working with horses on my own time." "That is wonderful," Deanna said, genuinely happy for him even as a small voice in her head whispered that he would not need her anymore now that his circumstances were improving. As if reading her thoughts, Quincy set her down and cupped her face in his hands. "I want you to see it." "Will you come with me tomorrow after your duties are finished?" she agreed, curious despite herself. The next evening they walked nearly 2 miles across ranch property to where the line cabin stood in a grove of oak trees. It was small and weathered but solidly built, with one main room, a stone fireplace, and a loft for sleeping. The land around it had once been a garden but had grown wild with neglect. "I know it needs work," Quincy said, watching her face anxiously. "But I thought maybe we could fix it up together." "That is, if you wanted to, if you were willing to consider making it our home." Deanna's breath caught. "Quincy, are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet," he said quickly. "I mean, I want to, but I want to do it right. I want to have something real to offer you first, not just a broken-down cabin and dreams. But I wanted you to know my intentions, wanted you to see that I am building toward a future that I hope you will share." She walked through the cabin, running her hands over the rough-hewn walls, imagining what it could become with care and effort. A real home. Her home. Their home. "I never thought I would have anything like this," she whispered, standing in the doorway and looking out at the surrounding land gilded by sunset. Quincy came to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "You deserve this and so much more. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have the things you have always been denied." They began working on the cabin whenever they could steal time from their duties. Quincy repaired the roof and replaced broken windows while Deanna scrubbed years of accumulated dirt from the floors and walls. Other ranch hands, seeing their efforts, donated odd pieces of furniture they no longer needed. Slowly, the cabin transformed from a neglected structure into a real home. In October, Quincy finally succeeded in gentling the gray Mustang. The horse had accepted a saddle and allowed Quincy to ride, moving with grace and power across the open range. The Kendrick brothers were so impressed that they offered to buy the horse for their breeding program at a substantial price. Instead, Quincy declined. "I have other plans for him," he said mysteriously when Deanna asked why he had turned down so much money. The answer came on a crisp November morning when Deanna finished her breakfast duties and stepped outside to find Quincy waiting with the gray Mustang saddled and bridled, the leather gleaming with fresh oil. Her heart began to pound as Quincy led the magnificent animal toward her. "What is this?" "This is yours," Quincy said simply. "I gentled him for you. I know you said you have never had anything of your own, never had the chance to learn to ride. Well, now you have both." Deanna stared at the horse, then at Quincy, unable to process what he was telling her. "I cannot accept a horse." "Do you know what he is worth?" "He is worth exactly one chance to see you smile the way you are smiling right now," Quincy replied. "He is yours, Deanna, completely and entirely yours. No one can take him away or claim him. He belongs to you alone." Tears streamed down her face as she approached the Mustang with trembling hands. The horse regarded her with calm, intelligent eyes, and when she touched his neck, he lowered his head and huffed warm breath against her palm. Something broke open inside her chest, some dam that had been holding back years of longing and grief and desperate hope. "I do not know what to say," she managed through her tears. "Say you will let me teach you to ride him," Quincy suggested gently. "Say you will name him something that makes you happy." She buried her face against the horse's neck, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of muscle and life beneath her hands. This was hers, something beautiful and powerful and real that belonged to her and her alone. "Storm," she said finally. His name is Storm because he is the color of rain clouds and because he is bringing change to my life like a summer storm changes the landscape." Quincy beamed at her. "Storm it is. Now let me teach you how to sit a horse." Learning to ride was harder than Deanna had imagined, requiring muscles she did not know she possessed, and a kind of balance that felt impossible at first. But Quincy was endlessly patient, holding Storm's lead rope and walking beside them while Deanna found her seat. The horse seemed to understand that his rider was inexperienced, moving carefully and responding to her hesitant cues with more gentleness than she deserved. After a week of lessons, Quincy declared her ready to try without the lead rope. "He will take care of you," he assured her. "Just trust him." Deanna gathered her courage and nudged Storm forward. The Mustang moved into a smooth walk, and she was flying, soaring, free in a way she had never experienced. The wind caught her hair as Storm broke into a trot, and she laughed with pure joy, understanding finally why Quincy spoke of horses with such reverence. When she brought Storm back to where Quincy waited, she was breathless and glowing. "That was incredible." "You are incredible," Quincy corrected, and the look in his eyes made her pulse race. They rode together whenever possible, Quincy on his painted stallion and Deanna on Storm, exploring the vast expanse of ranch land and the hills beyond. He showed her hidden valleys where wildflowers grew in riotous profusion, secret springs where water bubbled up cold and clear, and high overlooks where they could see for miles across the San Joaquin Valley. On one such ride in late November, Quincy led them to a particularly beautiful spot where an outcropping of rocks provided natural seating, and the view stretched all the way to the distant mountains. He had packed food in his saddlebags, and they ate lunch while the horses grazed nearby. "Deanna," Quincy said, setting aside his half-eaten sandwich and turning to face her fully. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have changed everything for me, made me believe in things I thought were just stories people told." Her heart began to hammer as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know I do not have a grand ranch to offer you yet, but I have the cabin, and I have my wages, and I have a whole lot of love that I want to spend on you for the rest of our lives." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone. "Deanna Lawson, will you marry me?" She looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the vast beautiful landscape spreading out below them, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Quincy slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the world spun with the dizzy joy of it all. They were married in December at the small church in Porterville, with Sarah and some of the other ranch workers in attendance. Deanna wore a dress that Sarah had helped her sew from fabric Quincy had bought in town, the first garment she had ever owned that had been made specifically for her. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Deanna felt like she was stepping into a life she had not dared to imagine. The Kendrick brothers gave them 2 days off for a honeymoon, which they spent in the Line cabin, now fully transformed into a cozy home. Quincy carried Deanna over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down in the main room where a fire crackled in the hearth and the smell of pine boughs filled the air. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jarrett," he said softly. "Home," Deanna repeated, testing the word. "I have never had one before." "Well, you have one now," Quincy assured her. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel homeless again." That first night as husband and wife, they talked for hours in front of the fire, sharing stories and dreams and secrets they had never told anyone. Quincy confessed that he had been planning to ask her to marry him since September, but had wanted to get the cabin ready first. Deanna admitted that she had fallen in love with him the very first evening by the creek, but had been too afraid to acknowledge it. "We wasted a lot of time being scared," Quincy observed, pulling her closer. "Maybe," Deanna agreed. "Or maybe we needed that time to be ready for this." Their physical intimacy that night was tender and sweet, a natural extension of the emotional connection they had been building for months. Quincy was patient and gentle, making sure Deanna felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in the loft with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Deanna thought that she had finally found her place in the world. Married life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Deanna continued working in the cookhouse during the day, though the Kendrick brothers had hinted they might need less help come spring. Quincy worked with the horse herd and spent his evenings building a proper corral near the cabin for Storm and his own horse. They saved every penny they could, working toward Quincy's dream of eventually buying their own land. In January, a particularly harsh cold snap moved through the valley, bringing temperatures that froze the water troughs and left the ground hard as iron. Deanna woke one morning to find Quincy already up and dressed, pulling on his heavy coat. "Where are you going so early?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the chill. "Some of the horses got loose during the night," he explained. "We need to bring them back before they get too far or injure themselves on the frozen ground." She made him take a thermos of hot coffee and a packet of biscuits, kissing him thoroughly before he headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. The day passed slowly, with Deanna distracted from her duties by worry. The temperature never rose above freezing, and the wind howled like something alive. Quincy did not return for supper, nor by the time full darkness fell. Deanna stood on the cabin porch, straining her eyes for any sign of movement, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. Finally, near midnight, she heard hoofbeats and saw Quincy riding toward her, looking exhausted but unharmed. "I was so worried," she said, helping him down from his horse and practically dragging him inside. "We found all the horses," he reported, his teeth chattering. "But it took longer than expected. A few had wandered nearly 5 miles. She made him sit by the fire while she heated soup and prepared a hot bath. Taking care of him felt natural, essential, and she realized with a start that this was what it meant to have someone of her own, someone whose well-being mattered more than her own comfort. As winter gave way to spring, Deanna began to notice changes in her body. Her monthly courses stopped, and she experienced waves of nausea that had nothing to do with the food she prepared. Sarah confirmed what Deanna had begun to suspect. "You are with child, dear," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "I would bet my best skillet on it." Deanna told Quincy that evening after supper, too nervous to know how he would react. They had talked about wanting children eventually, but had not planned for it to happen so soon. Quincy's face transformed with joy. "Truly, we are going to have a baby." "Sometime in September, I think," Deanna confirmed, and then she was in his arms, both of them laughing and crying at once. The pregnancy was not easy. Deanna continued working through morning sickness and fatigue, knowing they needed every bit of income they could get. Quincy worried constantly, trying to convince her to rest more, but she was stubborn about pulling her weight. In April, the Kendrick brothers made an announcement that changed everything. They had decided to sell the southern portion of their ranch, dividing it into smaller parcels that working men might afford. The section that included the line cabin would be available for $800. "That is more than we have saved," Deanna said quietly that evening, doing mental calculations. "Not by much," Quincy replied, his eyes distant with thought. "We have 600 put aside. If I take on extra work, and if we are careful, We might be able to make up the difference by the time the sale goes through in July." So Quincy worked double shifts, gentling horses during the day and taking on repair work around the ranch in the evenings. Deanna pushed herself harder than she should have, taking and mending and baking extra goods to sell in town. By June, they had scraped together $750. They were still $50 short when Quincy came home one evening with a strange expression on his face. "What happened?" Deanna asked immediately. "Tom offered to loan us the money we need," Quincy said slowly. "He said I helped him learn to train horses and he wants to repay the favor." "Can we accept?" Deanna asked, her hand resting protectively on her swelling belly. "I think we have to," Quincy replied. "This is our chance, Deanna, our chance to own something real." They accepted Tom's generous offer and paid the Kendrick brothers in full on July 15, 1885. The brothers drew up papers transferring ownership of 160 acres, including the cabin and surrounding land, to Quincy and Deanna Jarrett. When Deanna held those papers in her hands, seeing her name written there in official ink, she wept. "This is ours," she kept saying. "Actually ours. Everything I have is yours," Quincy told her, wrapping his arms around her as best he could with her pregnant belly between them. "But yes, this land belongs to us. No one can take it away." They spent the summer working their property, planning where to build additional corrals and maybe someday a barn. Quincy started his horse training business in earnest, with several ranch owners in the area already expressing interest in his gentling techniques. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility. Deanna went into labor on a hot September afternoon while she was hanging laundry behind the cabin. The pains started mild but quickly intensified. Quincy rode for Sarah, who arrived with practiced efficiency and took charge of the situation. Labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Quincy paced the main room like a caged animal, flinching every time Deanna cried out. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, a baby's wail filled the cabin. "You have a son," Sarah announced, emerging from the bedroom with a squirming bundle. "A big, healthy boy." Quincy took his son with trembling hands, staring down at the tiny red face with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is perfect." Deanna, exhausted but elated, held out her arms for the baby. When Sarah placed him against her chest, she felt a rush of love so intense it was almost painful. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to your home." They named him Thomas, after the friend who had helped them buy their land. Tommy, as they called him, was a good baby who nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches. Watching Quincy with his son made Deanna fall in love with him all over again. He was gentle and patient, changing soiled cloths without complaint and walking the floor at night when Tommy was fussy. "You are a natural father," Deanna told him one evening as she watched him rock Tommy to sleep. "I want to be the kind of father I never got to have," Quincy replied softly. "I want Tommy to grow up knowing he is loved, that he belongs somewhere." "He will," Deanna assured him. "We are giving him what we never had." The following years brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. Quincy's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and he had more work than he could handle. They paid back Tom within a year and began expanding their operation. They built a proper barn and additional corrals, and Quincy started breeding horses as well as training them. Deanna discovered she had a talent for managing the business side of things, keeping detailed records and negotiating contracts with the ranch owners who sought Quincy's services. She also started a vegetable garden that produced far more than they could eat, selling the surplus in Porterville. Tommy grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the property. Quincy made him a small wooden horse that he dragged everywhere, and Deanna sewed him clothes that were his and his alone, never hand-me-downs. In 1887, Deanna became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in early 1888 she delivered a daughter they named Clara. The little girl had Quincy's dark hair and Deanna's green eyes, and she was doted upon by both her parents and her big brother. Life was not perfect. There were hard years when drought reduced the grass and made feeding the horses difficult. There were lean months when money was tight and they had to be creative about meals. There were moments of doubt and fear, times when Deanna lay awake at night worrying about disease or injury or any of the 100 things that could go wrong. But through it all, she had Quincy. She had their children. She had the land with her name on the deed and the house they had built together. She had Storm, now an older horse but still hers, still the living reminder that she was worth giving to. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quincy surprised her with a trip to Porterville for dinner at the hotel restaurant. Sarah agreed to watch the children, and Deanna wore her best dress, the one Quincy had bought her for Christmas. Over dinner, Quincy took her hand across the table. "Do you remember what you told me that first evening by the creek, that you had never had anything of your own?" "I remember," Deanna said softly. "What do you have now?" he asked. She thought about her answer carefully. "I have a home. I have land with my name on it. I have horses and gardens and furniture that belongs to me. I have books on shelves that I chose. I have children who call me mother." And Quincy prompted. "And I have you," she finished. "But the truth is, Quincy, you are not something I own. You are someone I choose every single day just like you choose me. That is better than ownership. That is partnership." His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You are right. We choose each other, and I will keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life." They walked home through the mild December evening, hand in hand, talking about their plans for the ranch. Quincy wanted to expand into breeding horses specifically suited for ranch work, capitalizing on his reputation for producing intelligent, willing animals. Deanna suggested they might think about building a larger house in a few years, something with separate bedrooms for the children and maybe a proper dining room. "We could plant fruit trees," she added, warming to the subject. "Apples and pears do well in this climate. In a few years, we would have our own orchard." "I love the way your mind works," Quincy said, kissing her temple. "Always planning, always building toward something better." "I learned from you," Deanna replied. "You taught me that it is okay to want things, to work toward dreams instead of just accepting whatever comes." The years continued to unfold, each one adding layers to their life together. Tommy started school in Porterville, riding Storm the 3 miles each way with Deanna, worrying every moment he was gone. Clara grew into a spirited child who announced she was going to train horses just like her father. Quincy taught them both to ride almost before they could walk, and Deanna made sure they learned to read and do figures. In 1890, Deanna became pregnant once more, delivering twin boys in early 1891. James and Samuel were identical, impossible to tell apart except that James had a small birthmark on his left shoulder. The house felt full to bursting with 4 children under 8 years old, but it was a good kind of chaos. Quincy surprised Deanna by hiring a young woman from town to help with the housework and child care a few days a week. "You do too much," he insisted when she protested the expense. "Let someone help you the way people helped us when we were starting out." The woman, Lucy, was 18 and saving money to get married. She was cheerful and capable, and she adored the children. Having her help freed Deanna to focus more on the business aspects of the ranch, which had grown considerably. They now owned 300 acres, having purchased additional land from a neighboring rancher who was retiring. Their reputation for quality horses spread beyond Porterville. Buyers came from as far as Sacramento and even San Francisco, willing to pay premium prices for animals trained by Quincy Jarrett. Deanna managed the finances with care, putting money aside for the children's futures while also investing in improvements to the property. In 1893, they finally built the larger house Deanna had dreamed about. It was a 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a real dining room, and a kitchen 3 times the size of the old cabins. Deanna cried when she walked through it the first time, overwhelmed by the reality of owning something so substantial. "This is too much," she whispered, running her hands over the smooth plaster walls. "This is exactly enough," Quincy corrected. "This is what we worked for, what we built together." They kept the old cabin as well, using it for storage and sometimes as a guest house. Deanna could not bring herself to tear it down. It represented too much, meant too much as the place where their life together had truly begun. Tommy at 10 showed a real aptitude for working with horses, though he lacked his father's patience. Clara at 8 could read better than children twice her age and announced she wanted to be a teacher. The twins were rambunctious and inseparable, getting into constant mischief, but with such charm that it was hard to stay angry with them. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Quincy and Deanna would sit on the porch of their new house and watch the sun set over the land they owned. Sometimes they talked about the future, about what would happen to the ranch when they were gone, about whether the children would want to continue the horse training business or pursue their own dreams. "As long as they are happy," Deanna always said. "As long as they know they have choices." "They will know," Quincy assured her. "We are making sure of that." Other times they sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. Deanna never took these moments for granted. She remembered too well what it felt like to be alone, to have nothing and no one, to believe she would never deserve better. In 1895, tragedy struck when a fever swept through Porterville. Clara fell ill, burning up with temperature while Deanna sat by her bedside day and night, applying cool cloths and forcing sips of water past her daughter's cracked lips. Quincy rode to town for the doctor, but there was little to be done except wait and hope. For 3 days, Clara hovered between life and death while Deanna prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. She made bargains with God, promising anything if only her daughter would be spared. Quincy sat with her through the long nights, holding her hand and refusing to give up hope. On the 4th morning, Clara's fever broke. She opened her eyes and asked for breakfast in a weak but clear voice, and Deanna sobbed with relief. The doctor said it was a miracle that most children who got that sick did not survive. "She is a fighter," the doctor observed, "like her mother." The illness left Clara weak for weeks, but she recovered fully. The experience reminded Deanna how fragile life was, how quickly everything could be taken away. She held her children closer after that, treasured each ordinary day as the gift it was. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1897, they employed 3 full-time ranch hands in addition to Lucy, who had married but still helped part-time. Quincy had more work than he could handle alone, so he began training Tommy seriously, teaching him the gentling techniques that had made the Jarrett name synonymous with quality. Tommy took to the work with enthusiasm, though he was more inclined to take risks than his cautious father. Watching them work together, Deanna saw glimpses of what Quincy must have been like as a young man, full of confidence and skill. Clara did become a teacher, starting at 16 to help at the small schoolhouse in Porterville. She was gifted at making lessons interesting, and the children adored her. Deanna was so proud she could barely speak when she watched Clara conduct her first class. The twins, now 6, were still handfuls but showed signs of developing their own distinct personalities. James was quieter and more thoughtful, while Samuel was bold and impulsive. Both loved the ranch and talked about working with their father and brother when they grew up. Deanna was 35 now, her hands no longer smooth but capable and strong. Her hair showed the first threads of silver, and there were lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who had lived and worked and loved, someone who bore little resemblance to the frightened girl scrubbing pots in someone else's cookhouse. On a warm evening in June 1898, the whole family gathered for supper on the big porch. Tommy, now 16, entertained them with a story about a particularly stubborn mare he was working with. Clara, 14, talked about her students and the new books she had ordered for the school. The twins interrupted constantly, competing for attention, while Quincy and Deanna exchanged amused glances. After the meal, Quincy stood and clinked his glass for attention. "I have an announcement," he said, smiling at the curious faces turned his way. "I have been talking with some other ranchers, and we want to start a cooperative for breeding and training horses. It would be based here on our land, and it would employ several local men. I wanted to make sure the family was comfortable with the expansion before I agreed." Tommy whooped with excitement. "That would be incredible, Pa. We could really make a name for ourselves." "We already have a name," Quincy replied. "But yes, it would allow us to do more, reach more people." "What do you think, Ma?" Clara asked, watching Deanna's face. Deanna looked around the table at her family, at the house and land they had built together, at the future stretching out with such promise. "I think it is exactly what we should do," she said. "I think we should keep building, keep growing, keep reaching for more." The cooperative proved to be a huge success. Within a year, they had contracts with several military installations and large ranches throughout California. The Jarrett Ranch became known as the premier source for working horses, animals trained with patience and care rather than brutality. Success brought its own challenges. Managing the business took increasing amounts of time and effort. They hired an accountant in Porterville to help Deanna with the financial records, and Quincy brought on 2 more experienced trainers to help with the workload. Through it all, they made sure to protect their family time. Sunday dinners remained sacred, with everyone expected to attend regardless of work pressures. Deanna insisted on it, remembering too well what it felt like to be alone and isolated. In 1900, Tommy announced he was courting a girl from town, the daughter of the feed store owner. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was pretty and practical with a good head for business. Quincy teased his son mercilessly, but Deanna saw the way Quincy looked at her and understood exactly what Tommy was feeling. "She reminds me of you," Quincy told Deanna that night in bed. "Smart and strong, not afraid of hard work." "She is going to have her hands full with our son," Deanna replied with a smile. "But I think she can handle him." Tommy and Elizabeth married in the spring of 1901, and by the end of the year, Deanna was a grandmother to a baby girl named Rose. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Deanna thought about all the years that had passed since that evening when a cowboy had led a wild Mustang to her door. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy asked, watching her rock the baby. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Deanna said softly. "About that scared girl who thought she would never have anything of her own, who could not imagine deserving love or happiness or a family." "And now," Quincy prompted. "Now I have everything," Deanna said simply. "More than I ever dreamed possible." The years rolled on, bringing more grandchildren, more success, more moments of joy and sorrow woven together into the fabric of a well-lived life. Storm passed away peacefully at the age of 23, and Deanna wept for days, mourning the horse that had represented so much more than an animal. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Quincy carved a marker that reads Storm, the first thing that was truly hers. Clara married a schoolteacher from Sacramento and moved to the city, but visited often with her own growing family. The twins both stayed on the ranch, working alongside their father and brother to build the business even further. In 1910, on a cool autumn evening, Deanna and Quincy celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from all over the county. The house and grounds were filled with family, friends, employees, and business associates, all gathered to honor the couple who had built something remarkable from nothing. Speeches were made, toasting their success and partnership. But when Quincy stood to speak, he ignored all mention of business achievements. 25 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, I met a woman by a creek who told me she had never had anything of her own. I knew in that moment that I wanted to spend my life making sure she had everything she deserved. But what I did not understand then was that she did not need me to give her anything. She had the strength and courage to build a life all along. What we did was build it together, choosing each other every day, supporting each other through every challenge. He turned to look at Deanna directly. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. Everything good in my world exists because you are in it. Here is to 25 more years, and beyond that if we are blessed. Deanna stood and went to him, and they kissed while the crowd cheered. Later, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, they walked out to the hill where Storm was buried and looked down at the ranch, spread out below in the moonlight. You remember bringing Storm to me? Deanna asked, leaning against Quincy's solid warmth. Every detail, Quincy confirmed. You cried so hard I thought maybe I had done the wrong thing. Those were happy tears, Deanna said. They were the tears of someone who had finally been seen, been valued, been given something precious without conditions or expectations. You gave me just as much, Quincy told her. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose beyond just drifting from ranch to ranch. You made me want to build something lasting. We built it together, Deanna corrected. That is what makes it strong. They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other against all odds and had created a life worth living. The wind whispered through the oak trees, carrying the scent of grass and horses and home. As they walked back to the house, Deanna thought about that frightened girl who had scrubbed pots and believed she deserved nothing. She thought about the moment when a cowboy with patient hands and a kind heart had looked at her and seen something worth cherishing. She thought about the wild Mustang that had represented the first real gift she had ever received, the beginning of understanding that she was valuable simply for existing. Most of all, she thought about the years of love and partnership that had followed, the family they had built, the legacy they were leaving. She had started with nothing and now had everything that mattered, not because someone had handed it to her, but because she had worked for it, fought for it, chosen it every single day. I love you, she told Quincy as they climbed the porch steps. I love you too, he replied, as he had replied countless times over the past 25 years, and as he would continue to reply for all the years to come. Inside the house, their family slept, secure in the knowledge that they belonged somewhere, that they were loved, that they had roots deep enough to weather any storm. This was the true gift Deanna and Quincy had given each other and passed on to their children, not just property or success, but the understanding that home was not a place, but the people you chose to share your life with. The story that had begun with a lonely woman and a wild horse had become something bigger, something lasting. It was a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to the strength found in partnership, and to the truth that everyone deserves to have something of their own, whether that is land or horses, or simply the knowledge that they are valued. Deanna Jarrett, formerly Lawson, stood in her beautiful home surrounded by evidence of a life well lived and knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all those years ago. She belonged. She was loved. She was home, and in the end, that was everything. The following years brought the inevitable changes that come with time. Quincy's hair turned silver, and he moved a bit slower than he once had, but his hands were still steady with horses, and his eyes still lit up when Deanna entered a room. Deanna herself developed arthritis in her hands, the price of all those years of hard work, but she refused to let it slow her down significantly. They stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning over management to Tommy and the twins while they took on advisory roles. It was strange at first, letting go of the reins after so many years of being in control, but it was also liberating. They had time to travel, visiting Clara in Sacramento and taking a memorable trip to San Francisco to see the ocean. More grandchildren arrived, a dozen in total, each one welcomed with joy and spoiled appropriately. Deanna loved being a grandmother, loved the way she could enjoy the children without the constant weight of responsibility she had felt as a mother. She taught them to raid and garden and bake, passing on skills just as she passed on stories about the early days of the ranch. In 1915, the ranch celebrated its 30th anniversary with another large gathering. The event was bittersweet, as they had lost Tom the previous year to a sudden heart attack. His death reminded them all of mortality, of the importance of treasuring the time they had. But there was also much to celebrate. The ranch now encompassed over 1,000 acres and employed 20 people. They had bred and trained horses that had served in wars, worked on ranches across the West, and won competitions in major cities. The Jarrett name meant something in California horse circles, a reputation built on quality and integrity. "We did good," Quincy said to Deanna as they watched their family and friends celebrate. "We did very good," Deanna agreed, squeezing his hand. That night, lying in bed in the house they had built together, Deanna reflected on the long journey from that cookhouse in 1884 to this moment of contentment in 1915. 31 years of marriage, of partnership, of choosing each other through good times and bad. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy asked, his voice sleepy. "I am thinking about gratitude," Deanna replied, "about how lucky I am to have lived this life with you." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Quincy said, pulling her closer. "We worked for this. We chose this. Every single day we chose each other and chose to build something beautiful." "You are right," Deanna said. "And I would choose it all over again, every hardship, every challenge, if it meant ending up right here with you. Even the year the drought nearly bankrupted us," Quincy teased. "Even that," Deanna confirmed. "Even the twins' terrible twos, all 4 years of them," Quincy laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Well then, I would choose it all again too." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other as they had been for 3 decades. Two people who had found in each other everything they had been missing. The years continued their steady march. In 1918, the influenza pandemic reached Porterville, and the family held their breath as the disease swept through the community. They were fortunate. Though several of the ranch hands fell ill, all recovered, and the immediate family was spared. Clara's husband was not so lucky. He died in Sacramento, leaving Clara a widow at 32 with 3 children to raise alone. She moved back to Porterville, back to the ranch where she had grown up, and Deanna and Quincy welcomed her home with open arms. Having Clara and her children in the house breathed new life into it. The grandchildren filled the rooms with laughter and noise, and Clara took over managing the household, allowing Deanna to finally slow down after so many years of constant work. "I feel like I should be doing more," Deanna confessed to Quincy one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching the grandchildren play. "You have done enough for 3 lifetimes," Quincy told her firmly. "Let yourself rest. Let yourself simply enjoy." It was hard at first, this business of resting. Deanna had been working since she was a child, and idleness felt wrong. But gradually, she learned to appreciate the slower pace. She read all the books she had never had time for, worked in her garden at a leisurely pace, and spent long afternoons with Quincy, just talking or sitting in comfortable silence. In 1920, Tommy announced that he and Elizabeth were expecting their 6th child. At 40, Deanna was now a grandmother to 17 grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch had become a sprawling family compound, with multiple houses dotting the property as children married and started their own families while remaining part of the larger enterprise. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Deanna asked Quincy one evening. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "I hoped for a small ranch, maybe a few horses, a quiet life. This is beyond anything I could have pictured." "Do you wish it was simpler?" Deanna asked. Quincy considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Sometimes I miss when it was just you and me in that little cabin, figuring things out together. But I would not trade what we built for anything. This legacy, this family, this is what gives life meaning." Deanna understood exactly what he meant. There was beauty in simplicity, but there was also deep satisfaction in knowing they had created something that would outlast them, that would provide for generations to come. As they entered their 60s, both Deanna and Quincy's health began to show the wear of lives lived fully. Quincy developed a persistent cough that worried Deanna, though the doctor said it was nothing serious. Deanna's arthritis worsened, making it hard to do fine handwork, though she refused to complain. They adapted, finding new ways to be useful and engaged. Quincy spent hours with his grandchildren, teaching them about horses and life in equal measure. Deanna became the family historian, writing down stories of the early days so that future generations would know where they came from. In the summer of 1925, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. It was a quieter affair than their 25th, just family gathered for a special dinner. But the love and respect in that room was palpable, a testament to what they had built together. Tommy stood to offer a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made new every day. You showed us that hard work and integrity matter, that family comes first, and that anything is possible if you are willing to fight for it. Everything good in our lives flows from the foundation you built." Deanna wiped tears from her eyes as Quincy squeezed her hand under the table. Looking around at their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, she felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they had created. "Thank you," she whispered to Quincy later when they were alone. "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me when I was invisible," Deanna said. "For giving me Storm, for giving me a home, for giving me this beautiful life, for loving me when I did not know how to love myself." "You gave me all those things too," Quincy replied. "We saved each other, Deanna. That is what love does." They sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over land that bore their name, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on love and partnership. The wild Mustang that Quincy had gentled 41 years ago was long gone, but his legacy lived on in the horses that still bore Storm's bloodline, in the ranch that had grown from that first gift, and most importantly, in the lesson that everyone deserves to have something of their own. Deanna thought about that frightened young woman who had believed she was worth nothing, who had never dared to dream of anything better. She thought about the cowboy who had seen past her circumstances to the person underneath, who had given her not just a horse, but a chance to believe in herself. The story of how Quincy broke a wild Mustang and led it to her door had become family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren as an example of love and generosity. But Deanna knew the real story was bigger than that single gesture. It was the story of two people choosing each other every day for 40 years, building a life and a legacy through hard work, devotion, and unwavering commitment. As twilight deepened into night and stars began to appear overhead, Deanna leaned against Quincy's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of his presence. This was home, not the house or the land, though those mattered. Home was wherever Quincy was, wherever their family gathered, wherever love lived. She had started with nothing and now had everything. Not because of luck or chance, but because a cowboy with kind eyes and patient hands had looked at her and decided she was worth the effort. And she had looked back at him and decided to be brave enough to accept the gift, to believe she deserved good things, to build a life instead of just surviving one. "I love you," she said into the quiet evening. "I love you too," Quincy replied, as he had replied countless thousands of times before. Always and forever. And that, Deanna thought with deep contentment, was the greatest gift of all. Not the land or the horses or the success, but the simple, profound truth that she was loved and that she loved in return. Everything else was just details. The story that had begun with a lonely woman and a wild horse had become an epic of family, legacy, and enduring love. And it was far from over. As long as the Jarrett name endured, as long as children were told the story of how it all began, the love between Deanna and Quincy would continue to ripple outward, touching lives not yet born. She had never had anything of her own until a cowboy broke a wild Mustang and led it to her door. But that first gift had opened the floodgates, teaching her that she was worthy of love, of partnership, of a life lived fully and joyfully. And in learning to accept what was offered, she had found not just possessions but purpose, not just a home but a legacy, not just a husband but a soulmate who would walk beside her through all the days of her life. This was the happily ever after she had never dared to dream of. And it was more beautiful than any fairy tale because it was real, built on the foundation of daily choices and unwavering commitment. As Deanna and Quincy sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the family they had raised, they knew that their story would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the transformative power of love given freely and received gratefully. And that was everything